Hi everyone and welcome to the channel. Today I'm doing an extra video because Blizzard has just made an announcement. They're making some key nerfs to some big cards in the game right now, and I think it's really going to change how the game is played. So stay tuned, I'll take you through all of the changes and what decks they affect, etc. But I'm going to get straight into it, and this is a new change I'm excited about and also a bit surprised by, and that is a change to Patches the Pirate. Now the reason I'm surprised by this nerf is because I think it's always been a problem, this card, and I was surprised it didn't happen earlier, and also it's rotating out of the game in a couple of months. But they've made the change and I will welcome it because I think it's a good change. And what they're doing, Patches remains exactly the same except it is losing charge. So when you play a pirate, he still comes out of your deck and you get your 1/1 Patches on the board. However, the main reason Patches was used really was to control the board in the early game, or in a really aggressive deck just push that extra damage to the face. Well, by not having charge, it allows your opponent to react much better now, and I really don't think people will play this card anymore. You still get the benefit of it coming out of your deck, so it thins your deck and makes you draw better cards as you go. However, I just don't think it's going to be strong enough anymore to be played. I think this essentially kills the card. You may still see it played in some Keleseth decks, so if you've already buffed Patches and then you play a pirate, then it's not too bad getting Patches come out as either a 2/2 or a 3/3 if you play a South Sea Captain. But because it doesn't have charge anymore, it's not nearly effective, so I think people will be looking for replacements, and even maybe not even running pirates anymore, because one of the main reasons for running a South Sea Captain was because you could pull out a 2/2 with charge Patches, or a 3/3 once you buffed it with Keleseth. So this is a really welcome change, and although it's always been a problem, I think it has been especially a problem in this new expansion. I think almost every deck has been playing it. I've seen Priests running it, and I think when you see Priests running a card like Patches the Pirate, I think you know that it needs to be changed. So a welcome change, and one that's going to kill that card off, in my opinion. Next is another change which I think is a good one. I think maybe that might be a little bit on the harsh side, but it definitely did need to be changed, and that is the Corridor Creeper. Now, Corridor Creeper was introduced in the latest expansion, and it quickly became an auto-include into every deck. And again, when a card just gets automatically included into every deck, I think you need to look at making a change. And the reason it was an auto-include was because it costs 7 mana, but all you need is 7 minions to die, and then it suddenly costs 0 mana. Now, this really isn't that hard to do. It feels like it would be hard, but it also, the effect also activates when your opponent's minions die. So even if you're playing a control deck and you've got this in your opening hand, say if you're a Priest for example, and your opponent's playing an aggressive deck, you play one board clear, and suddenly you can play your Corridor Creeper for a huge discount, sometimes even free. And even though you've had no minions die yourself, and it can create these huge tempo swings. And if you're playing in an aggressive deck, then you've got these low-cost aggressive minions. They can trade in, they die off to board clears, etc. And you can play a 0 mana 5/5. And so it was really disheartening when you're playing a control deck and you're managing to fight off the waves of attacks from the aggro, and then you clear their board and suddenly 2 of these Corridor Creepers come down and there's just nothing you can do. So I'm really happy about this change, and what they've done is they've changed it from a 5/5 to a 2 attack 5 health minion. But effectively what this does is, again, I think it pretty much kills the card, just like Patches. I don't think people will play this. The only deck I can see this being useful in is potentially if you're playing Hunter and you're playing the Tundra Rhino, which gives your minions charge, or your beasts charge. So you could potentially play it in that deck because you could play it for free. You play your Tundra Rhino and then you can buff it with a Houndmaster or a Crackling Razormaw, for example. So it might potentially go into that kind of deck. It's also maybe not too bad in a control deck because if you do manage to kill off all of the aggressive minions from your aggro deck, the aggro deck you're playing against, you can play this quite cheap, and the 2 attacks still enough to really impact the board when you're playing against, say, Aggro Paladin, for example. I think 2 attacks fine. However, I think it probably won't see play. So that's an interesting change, one that I could have predicted coming, I think, and I think most people will be pleased about that. Next up is probably the most balanced change, and that is with Bonemare. So Bonemare costs 7 mana, 5/5. The battle cry gives a minion plus 4/4 and taunt. With this one, I'm quite happy with it. I think it's actually a good change, and I think if you're running Bonemare in your deck already, I don't think you'll take it out. So all they've done is added an extra mana to it, so it now costs 8 mana instead of 7. And I think that's a good change because it doesn't kill the card. The card is still very strong at that cost. It just slows the game down. So I think that's a good change, and I'm quite happy about it. A lot of people complained about this in the last expansion. I never thought it was terrible because it's a common card, everyone can have access to it. The final change, which is also a really big change, is to Raza the Chained. Again, this card is rotating out of the standard game in 2 months anyway when the new expansion comes, so that's not too much of an issue. But what they've done is they've changed it from, with the battle cry reducing your hero power to 0, now the battle cry reduces your hero just to 1. So that is a massive change because Raza Priest is one of the top decks in the game right now, if not the best deck. It's still being played. It was around since the last expansion when Shadow Reaper Anduin came in. So now with your hero power costing 1 rather than 0, it dramatically reduces the damage that they can do in 1 turn. Even if they're trying to kill you over multiple turns, it's going to take them longer, and it allows you more time to get your board built up and potentially get your combo in. So again, I think this change essentially kills the card and kills the deck. Potentially, if you wanted to make a control priest deck, it might work. So if you had some kind of control priest deck where you played Anduin and you were more using the hero power to control your opponent's board rather than kill them their face, I think potentially it could work. But the deck as it is right now, I think is dead. I don't think people will see that played. And although I don't think the deck itself necessarily needed to be nerfed, because I think at the moment there were some pretty decent decks that competed quite well with it. I think it's quite good because the deck's been around for a while, and taking it away from people isn't a bad thing after it's been played for so long. Now it's time to introduce some new decks and try and just mix the game up a little bit, because all through Knights of the Frozen Throne people were playing Anduin and Raza. The new expansion comes out, they're still playing Anduin and Raza. This change will mean that we'll hopefully see some better decks come out of it. Maybe some different priest decks still using Raza, but I think it will go away completely. So which decks does this affect the most? Well, obviously the Raza Priest, I think that will disappear. I don't think people will be playing that very much anymore. But mostly, and what I quite welcome is that aggressive decks have been heavily nerfed. So especially Tempo Rogue's taken a big nerf, losing Patches, the charge from Patches, and also the Corridor Creeper nerf, and also Bonemare nerf really does cut Tempo Rogue back a lot. I think that Aggro Paladin has taken a big hit. They usually make very good use of the Corridor Creeper and also Patches. Zoo Warlock as well, they make use of the Corridor Creeper and Patches, so that's going to take a hit. Corridor Creeper and Patches also go into the Aggro Druid, the Token Druid deck, which again is a huge nerf for them. So those sort of decks are going to take a step backwards. Decks that are going to improve and go forwards are, I would suggest, the Kingsbane Rogue. I think that will be a lot better to play now. I think the Miracle Rogue will be a lot better, because a lot of the time if you're playing either of those decks and you're playing against an aggressive deck, you just die before you can get any kind of combo put together. But now it's going to be a little bit easier to do that. I think Quest Mage is the same. Quest Mage will come back, and I think that will be good. What I would like to see is more Paladin decks, because at the moment the only deck in Paladin you can play is Aggro Paladin, in my opinion. There are other decks that you can play, but really competitive Aggro Paladin's the only one that's really strong. I'd like to see some more Lanessa Sunsorrow decks and more Control Paladin decks, potentially bringing Uther of Everblade back into the game. You don't see much of that. So I think that could be potentially a place where we see some more improvements. Murloc Paladin will still be around. That hasn't been affected by these changes, although it did have a nerf a couple of months ago with the change to the War Leader. So Murloc Paladin will still be in the game just as it is today. But there is one clear winner in these changes, and that is the Q Block. So the Q Block doesn't play any of these cards. so it hasn't been affected at all. And in fact, a lot of the decks, its competitive decks, have taken a huge hit. So Q Block is going to be really, really strong, and I'm a little bit disappointed by that, because Q Block is a really fun deck. It's actually a really clever deck. It's a fun deck. It creates really interesting games. I enjoy playing against it and playing with it, because you can, when you're playing against it, it encourages you to think about when you use your ooze on the weapon, when you use your silence, what cards they've got in their hand, how to play around Gul'dan, etc. However, it is so strong that it's very difficult to play against. And now, if all of these other top decks are taking a nerf, that just makes Q Block even better. So lots of people are going to be playing more Q Blocks, and I think the more people that play it, the more frustrated you will get, because you're just playing against it all the time. And when Hearthstone becomes samey, it's just not as fun. It's not as fun when you're playing the same deck all the time. However, I'm hoping that this will encourage people to play more anti-Q Block decks. So I've been playing Elemental Mage recently, and honestly, against Q Block, I had so much success with that deck. There are sometimes you just can't get around it and they will win, but mostly I was able to win because you have enough answers to deal with the things that they're playing. I found Polymorph was really good, obviously, and also Potion of Polymorph, which I got off of some of the random spellstones. That worked really well. And if you get Jaina early enough, you can just control the board, and because the Q Block's drawing through their cards so quickly, you can just control the board until they die of fatigue. And I really found that quite a good deck. So maybe Elemental Mage will become stronger if there's more and more Q Blocks. Also, I think Quest Mage might work quite well against a Q Block. So we're definitely going to see some changes. The other deck that you're going to start to see a lot more of is any deck that contains a Spiteful Summoner. So I really like this card. I think it was really clever, and it encourages you to kind of design your deck differently so that you've only got high cost spells, for example, just to make this card work. And it is really strong. They're not going to be able to make use of the Corridor Creepers anymore in the Summoner Priest, for example, but I still think that deck is going to be really good. You can also use it in Druid. I've used it with Cthulhu and without Cthulhu. Both decks work quite well. So I'd like to see those decks kind of improve. Maybe this will encourage people to think of different decks that we haven't seen before. I've been trying to play Warrior recently, so I've been trying Cthulhu Warrior. I've also been trying to make Geosculptor Yip work. So I'd really like Warrior to come back into it, because at the moment Warrior isn't a good class on the ladder. I think the only deck you can play really is Pirate Warrior, and that's taking a nerf. So hopefully we'll see something new. However, overall I'm quite happy with these changes. I like them making changes to cards a couple of months after expansion, because it just changes the game up a bit. And you know, if we're still playing 2 months after this with Corridor Creepers and patches, it gets a bit boring before the new expansion comes out. But now they're making these changes. Hopefully we'll see some new decks come out and some new cards emerge to replace those. I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think they missed any cards? Is there any cards you would have liked to see changes? Do you think they were too harsh, not harsh enough? Let me know in the comments. So one final bit of good news out of all of this is that if you do own any of these cards, you will be able to dust them for the full refund after the changes are made. So for example, if you have patches now and you dust him, you'll only get 400 dust. However, after the nerf has been made, you can dust him for 1600 dust, which means you can effectively just swap your patches of Pirate for another legendary that you don't have. So that's pretty cool if you do own any of these cards. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.